Okay, so we were doing this letter of Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi. Remember, there had been a letter from the Vilna Gaon. This is sort of a resurgence of the battle in the 1790s, 1797. The Vilna Gaon had written, remember, about the dangers of Chassidut, but it's when it comes to him, and especially, I guess, these years later, it's different. It's really much more about Kabbalah and the nature of how one sees God. And the difference between seeing God as manifest in everything, which is a more Hasidic bent, kind of perhaps panentheism, and the Vilna Gaon's take on it, which is that it means God's infinity means that God has hashgacha. God guides the world. God has power over the world. God has divine providence, but it doesn't mean that God is inherent in everything physical. And how the Vilna Gaon would understand God infinity, obviously, is a question, or how the Chasidim would understand our existence is a question, and that's has to do with the way that one sees the concept of tzimtzum, of God's contraction in Kabbalah. This is all, of course, based on the Ari's Kabbalah, Isaac Luria, from the early 1500s. And is tzimtzum something that does it mean that from our side, we only see part of God, we don't see the divine fully revealed, but that from the divine side, it doesn't impact God's infinity? Or does tzimtzum mean something else? So we were on. So first, Rabbi Shner Zalman had said, this is a letter to his students in Vilna, and he gives them several reasons why they shouldn't argue with the Gaon, basically, which is you're not going to convince him, it's not going to work, it's not going to help the effort. And then, and this is the introduction that we're reading right now by the person who put together all these letters. And then he tells us that in the letter, Rabbi Shner Zalman is going to talk about the Kabbalistic question. Part of the question is, does God's presence reside in evil? And therefore, can you utilize evil for good? Now, obviously, that's very close to a Shabtai Tzvi-like position, which was that, if God is infinite, then anything can be holy. And I mean, it even becomes, wild, in which for Jacob Frank, doing the opposite of the Torah is really the goal. So I think the both of them emerge out of the Ari's Kabbalah. I mean, obviously, Sabbatianism was a perversion of it, but I think that's got to be some of the anxiety here, is that when it really comes to these fundamental Kabbalistic questions, the Chasidim end up on a side that could be associated, I think, with Sabbatianism. So we're over here. This letter from Rosh Hashanah is missing a date. It seems that from the content, it's after the Tanya was published, which was Rabbi Shner Zalman's compendium of his writings, and that was in 1797. And it seems also from the letter that the Vilna Gaon is still alive, because the Rabbi Shner Zalman is telling the students, don't argue with the Gaon. And the Gaon dies in 1798. Apparently was written as an addendum to a book, which was published in Königsberg in Tafresh Yud Ches, which is 1808. He goes, he's an academic, so he goes through all the places where this is published. And obviously, we're not getting it from the original letter. But the letter gets republished in several different books. Okay. And sometimes it's slightly different nuskha, slightly different versions of letters. So here's the letter. This is the letter of Rabbi Shlomo Shner Zalman to his Avli Adi, to his students in Vilna. Obviously, by now, he and several others are really the leaders of Chassidut, Rabbi Menachem and Lubitevsky and a few others. In Vilna. So this is an introduction. After I have asked about your peace, after my salutation, Pasach Divrai Yair Ozen Shamat Koshet Imre Emet Lamito Derav Kenegdo. We have to hear the truth when we are arguing with those who are against us. Ilu Hayab Efshari Labo Lidei Gamar Nachonimahem. If it's possible to come to a good agreement, a good end with them, if we can find a way to resolve this argument, that would be the biggest mitzvah, he says, to make peace among the Jewish people. Yes, mi ein kamo ele. Okay, so there's a slightly different books that have republished this have a slightly different wording here, but what is greater than making peace? So that's interesting, right? Rabbi Shner, you have to give Rabbi Shner Zalman a lot of credit. He's not on a warpath, right? The Vilna Gaon's on a warpath against the Chasidim because he thinks that they're dangerous. Rabbi Shner Zalman is defending, and his approach is, all the best thing would be to make peace. We're not out to fight. But what can we do? We haven't done anything bad. And we've tried hard. We've tried hard to make peace, right? 25 years before, he went to go visit the Gaon. And I'm sure there were a lot of other efforts. We are clean from before God and the Jewish people. We've done our part. Way at the beginning, he says, 1772, we went to go visit the Gaon. May his light shine. Now it's interesting, right? Rabbi Shner Zalman calls him Hagon HaChasid, which is how they referred to the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon was also referred to as a Chasid, pious person. Lebeito, we tried to go to his house, to debate with him. In order to, remove his complaints from us. Bioti Shamim Harav Chasid Hamunach Harav Mendel Harasaner. He says he traveled there with Rabbi Mendel. That's Rabbi Mendel, Menachem Mendel Lubitevsky. He was sometimes called, I guess, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Haradenker, which Rav Nosson, or Menachem's student, was also it's called Haradenker. And he says, V'sigar Tidelos Ba'deinu Pa'amayim. And he says, we tried twice to meet with the Gaon in the 1770s, and he closed the door on us twice. And when the heads of the city wanted to speak to him, Rabbeinu, Hine zeh harav hamafursim shalahem bal hipakeach im kavod Torah. So, and I guess when the heads of the city of, Vilna, tried to talk to the Vilna Gaon, or maybe, zeh harav hamafursam shalahem bal hipakeach. Include Torah. So, kasher yenutzach bevadai hine bazeh yeshal Yisrael v'dachos hamidichuyim. Sounds like other people went also to argue with the Gaon, people from Vilna, but the Vilna Gaon and Rav Shner Zalman says, we could have made peace, but he says Vilna Gaon pushed them away too. Kasher achilu lahaftzir bo ma'od Chalav halachlo. And when people were pressuring him to dialogue, the Vilna Gaon left the city and stayed there till we left, as is well known to the heads of his city. And afterwards, we traveled to Shklov, also to have a debate there. Below also but it did not succeed. And they did things to us that people should not do. And they had promised us, I guess that they wouldn't do anything bad, but they did. And when they saw, when the people in Shklov during this debate saw they didn't have an answer, so then started fighting with us. And all they said was, we're followers of the Vilna Gaon. We don't have to have an argument. We just rely on him. It's in the notes here. That's very good. He says, we don't really know when the exact date of this debate in Shklov. This was one of the early debates. Rav Shlomo Zalman B'Goteler Avram Mikalisk, in a letter that Rabbi Shlomo Shner Zalman writes to Rabbi Avram Mikalisk, which he wrote after Tavkuf Samach Gimel, which is that would be 1803. All right. Yeah. And he was talking there about the argument between them. He writes that in the winter of 1772, after the debate in Shklov. So you see, the debate in Shklov was before 1772. Ramim Nikbel Tanachash Bikurim Shel Ramam Shner Zalman Bevilna Ezman Kotov Nelaso El Shel Ramoshe Menachem Mendel Eretz Yisrael. On the other hand, we have we know that Menachem Mendel and Rav Shner Zalman went to visit the Gaon, and that was right before Menachem Mendel moved to Israel, to Tzfat. The Shonosh Rav Shlomo Zalman, it's kind of the Shklav. So you see that this must have been before. He says, it sounds like, from this letter he's saying, it sounds like Rav Shner Zalman and Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk went together to Shklav, which would put this in 1772. Okay, a little more academic. Whether it was 72, 1771, doesn't bother us so much. So what does he mean by in Shklov, they did to us things you shouldn't do to people? Subalan and Beis Rebbe. So we have a later book called Beis Rebbe. That was published, I think, by Chasidim about these years. They took our rabbi, meaning Rabbi Shner Zalman Liadi, and they closed him up in a martef the whole night. I think a martef is a stockade. Let's see, or maybe martef is a room. I think martef usually means like a corner. Cellar. They put him in a cellar all night, and the next day they were going to degrade him, whatever that means. But I assume it means they'd publicly beat him. But with God's grace, he was able to run away from there and get to a hotel. The hotel of Mr. Varsit of Shklov. But when he got there, he heard that the owner of the hotel was also misnagid. So he left there and went to a different hotel, and there he was saved, and he came peacefully to our Rabbi Menachem Mendel. Okay, so it's interesting. You get a sense of what's going on. That in the early days, the Chasidim, Rabbi Shner Zalman Liadi, right? Who we know, right? That's who Lubavitchers always refer to as the Alter Rebbe. Obviously, he was a great rabbi, wrote the Tanya. He's on the run. They want to beat him publicly. So the way that Rabbi Shner Zalman describes it, when they saw they couldn't answer us, so then that's what frustrated them, and they just hung their hat on the Vilna Gaon. Daninuhu lekaf zechut liyot kvar nechlat ha'inyan etzlo behechlet gamor b'lishum sveka ba'olam. So we judged him, the Vilna Gaon, meritoriously. And we assumed that he had no doubt at all about his side, his argument with us. Nigmar dinat so LP Gviat Adim. And the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Shner Zalman says, was judging us based on witnesses, on what he thought were good witnesses. People who are kosher witnesses. As a Dvar Torah, Mehasarsur Hayadua, Asher Yafreshis calls that Lo Hishkif Bashkafa Latov Lahapit Bizchus, Yulaya Sarsor Shina Balashim Tas. So let me see what a Sarsor is. Very funny. In modern Hebrew, sarsor is a pimp. So it must be somebody who was paid to lie. Right. So, and it's generally the witnesses that would come to the Gaon were good, and they had a standard of kashrut. They had a status quo of being good witnesses. But when they heard something from the Sarsur, what's the Sarsur? It must be a certain person. So he says, Yitachen Shahid Kaven Larav Avigdor Rabba Shalpitz. So he says it sounds like this Sarsur, the person who's like lying, basically, or being paid to lie. It sounds like he's the Rabbi Avigdor, the Rabbi of Pinsk. Sonam Mubak Shal Chasidim, and he was a very big hater of Chasidim. Shahodach Merabotenu al Yidei Chasidei Karlina Smucha. He chased the Chasidim in Karlin. Hu haya ben amishtadim etzel agra. She agvira to redifud al Chasidim. Bishu ba'atzmo me'id b'ktav Malshina Shalo Lekaiser Favel. So it sounds like this Rabbi Avigdor went to the government. He wrote something to the Kaiser in 1800, basically, I guess, trying to get the government to persecute the Chasidim. That's what it sounds like. All right, we'll finish this letter next time. But it's not surprising that this is not a small thing. In other words, Jews, governments in those days regulated religious life to some extent, although the Jews were pretty, in many places, were autonomous. But what that meant was that Jewish leaders could have power over other Jews, governmental power, and so that's not surprising. It's funny, it reminds us a little bit of Hamza and Bar Kamsa, the story of the destruction of Jerusalem in the Talmud, where Jews are fighting with each other and they bring the government into it. Anyway, okay, we'll some more of this. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.